The past is past, but not all pasts are the same. Welcome to Jenn's Writing World. If you have a story to tell, you are in the right place. Let's do it one day at a time. All stories are either written in the past, the present, or the future. Last week I learned that some topics are too big to do in one episode of Jenn's Writing World. Sorry that last Sunday went a little long. So this week, instead of covering the past, the present, and the future, we're just going to cover the past, which actually is where most books live. When we are writing a story, we tell it in past tense. We tell it because these things have already happened, and the narrator, which we discussed last week, is telling you what happened. However, even the past is not that simple. A wonderful website called The Unfinished Bookshelf has a wonderful definition of what tenses are. Verb tenses are used to explain the relationship between an action and time. Remember that. Action and time. So something is happening, and for today's talk, it is happening in the past. But when in the past it's happening determines the type of past tense that we use. You have probably heard things like past perfect and past progressive and wondered, what on earth does all that mean? Aren't we just in the past? Well, today I'm going to explain it, and I'm going to explain it in a way that in the future, when you hear the word past perfect, you'll know exactly what it means and why it's important that we do know. So, as I said, there are 4 types of past tense. There is simple past, there is past perfect, there is past progressive, also known as past continuous, and there is past perfect progressive, also known as past perfect continuous. At first, these may sound like gobbledygook words and not make any sense, but there's actually only 2 types of pasts. But there's 2 types of those 2 types. And here's a simple chart to help you. You might notice that simple past and past progressive or continuous are connected, as in they are the same type of past tense, but one shows an action in the past and one shows a continuous action in the past. And we're going to talk about those in a moment. The other 2, past perfect and past perfect progressive, say all those P's, you might notice that those also are connected in the same way that they are up above. So you really either have simple past or you have past perfect. And then you either have a past that is stagnant, as in it happened in the past, or a past that is still moving, which means it started in the past and it continued either into the present or into another moment in the past. So now that we know that there's actually only 2 types and 2 types of those 2 types, let's get started and dissect which one you need for which situation. The simple past is used when talking about events that happened before now, the present. The simple past is the most common way to tell a story. It's what we use all the time, whether we are writing a book or telling a story to friends. I went to the movies yesterday. I talked to my boss about getting a raise. I used to swim 3 times a week. All of these events happened in the past, and therefore we use the past tense of the verb to describe it. Now you might notice that third one, because we put in the used to, that tells us that it's in the past tense, so the verb itself is in the present tense. But you don't need to worry about it, just know that is another form of simple past. For the most part though, when we talk to people, when we write a story, simple past. It's simple. Okay, we're going to skip past perfect right now. We're going to go to past progressive, also called past continuous. This is used when something started in the past and is still going on. It is continuous. It is progressive. It's in the name. So it is the simple past. But instead of it being I ran last week, being that I'm not running at the moment. It's something that happens in the past and is still happening. Here are some examples. The windshield wipers were swishing back and forth. So you'll notice that we make that past progressive or past continuous by adding was or were and an ing to the verb. The windshield wipers were swishing back and forth. This implies that they continued to do so for some time. It was not a one-off. So when you're telling your story and you're talking about the rain coming down, you would then say that the windshield wipers were swishing on and off, implying that throughout the entire story, this is what they were doing. It was not that they did it and then they stopped as you continued your story. Thus, it is continuous. You can attach the past progressive with the simple past, and it would look like this. I was painting the fence when a butterfly landed on my brush. This is a great example. So the continuous activity is the painting, right? I was painting. That is in the past, an action that is continuous. The butterfly landed is simple past because it was an action in time. It happened and then it was done. Perfectly clear, right? We have simple past and we have past progressive. One is because an event happened, and one is because of an event continued to happen. Easy. All right, so now we get to move on to past perfect. Don't worry, it's not that hard either. This is how we describe events that happen in the past before other events. It's often used for flashbacks, but it can also be used for events that happen, as they said, before other events that you are describing in the story. Here's an example. Norma had planned a quiet evening at home, but Ed invited her to a party. You will notice there is a had before the planning. That's the past perfect. It basically says that the planning to stay home happened before Ed invited her to a party. We know it happened before because there's a had. Super simple, right? We don't want to call it simple because that would be super past. But how about this? It's perfect. It's the past perfect. You're basically doing a timeline and you're saying these items happened in the past before these other items. Super simple. Okay, so I said that writing a flashback, you want to use the past perfect. So something that often happens is somebody goes into a dream state or they just think back to their childhood and you're writing it in the simple past. And the reader doesn't know whether you're in a flashback or whether you're in something that's happening and maybe it happened yesterday and they're thinking about it. And the way to differentiate, the way to tell somebody this is a flashback is to use that had, is to use the past perfect. But here's another trick. You don't have to put the had. You don't have to use the past perfect in every single sentence in a flashback. Especially if your flashback goes on for a couple of pages, which it might. All you have to do is put the past perfect for the first few sentences. And then it kind of becomes one of those fade outs that you might see in a movie where the person is sitting there and they think and it fades and suddenly you're watching the events happen. Putting the first few sentences in the past perfect gives you that fade, that connection that says, oh, we're going far into the past. We're going to a flashback. So we are separate from the story being told. But then you can just use simple past for the entire story because the reader will understand that we've moved in time. So you don't have to use hads all the way through because if you do that, it becomes really hard to read. But you do need them in the beginning. And it's good that when you get to the end and they pop out of the flashback and back into the simple past, so back into the main storyline, that you have a transition. And you say, Martha blinked her eyes and wiped tears away from the memories. And now we know we're out of the memories and back into that. If you don't do a transition, because you had kind of transferred your flashback into simple past, if you come from simple past into simple past, it can also get confusing. But a transition right there as you come out of a flashback and back into the main story, super easy to do, and it ends all confusion. And as I always say, we write for clarity and understanding. And the whole point of writing in the correct tense is to get that clarity and understanding. Okay, we got one left to do, and that is the past perfect progressive, also known as the past perfect continuous. All those P's. Okay. In the same way that past continuous is for actions that continue forward, past perfect continuous is for actions that start in the far past and ended in the past. Okay, do you see the difference? So past continuous, past progressive, you have things that are happening, but they're happening in the past. They might be happening within the story, but they continue. If you're doing past perfect progressive, then you're doing things that happened before other events, but those things continued to happen, but they stopped before you reached the present. So again, it's kind of telling you the order that things happen. And here's an example. I had been running every morning for 3 months when I twisted my ankle. So you'll notice that there's a past tense there, simple past. I twisted my ankle. That happens in the past. I had been running every morning for 3 months. That happens before it, and it's something that was continuously happening. I was running every morning. So it's not just a one-time event. That would be past perfect. This is past perfect continuous because it's something that's happened in the far past, and now it's, but it also ended in the far past. We're not saying we ran today. We're saying we run in the past, the far past. Okay, so how did we make it past perfect continuous? We added had been, and we added an ing. This is just like we did with past continuous, where we added the ing, right? This time we're adding the had been and an ing. It's really very simple, and it connects to past perfect because it is something that happens in the way past, but because it's continuous, because it's progressive, it is something that continues to happen. Here's another example. James had been working 50 hours a week until he caught a cold. So the past perfect continuous is James had been working 50 hours a week. This is something he was continuing to do until he caught a cold. So we know that he was continuing to do it. It ended in the past. Why did it end? He caught a cold. There you go. And all of that is very simply explained because you used your tenses correctly. Clarity and understanding. So there you go. 4 types of past tenses, which are actually only 2 types of past tenses used in 2 different ways. Here's the chart one more time to make that clear. Okay, now, in order to use your tenses properly, you might need to make a timeline. But the honest truth is you should probably have a timeline anyway, so it's your story, and you don't want to be screwing up when something happened. It all happened in the past, but which came first and which came second? It's important that you know so that you can tell the story properly, and it's important that you let your reader know so that they can read the story properly. Thus the need for 4 types of past tenses, and now you won't have any problem using them because they're simple and they're perfect. Thank you for joining me for another Sunday full of the craft of writing. If you want to join me Tuesday as we write for 25 minutes twice, or see my shorts on Friday, you can hit the subscribe button down below. A like is always appreciated, and I would love it if you would share the channel with your friend. Today's quote is by Paula Munier. She is a mystery writer of some note, and she has a really great website. I did put a link down below for you to check out. And this is what she said. Flashbacks immediately put the story in reverse. Watch that you don't overdo it. I like a good flashback when it's important, but even more important is that you use the right tense so that we know that it's the right flashback. So long from Jenn's writing world. Until we meet again, write.